Hey guys, the federal government in Canada has just announced that they're extending their current border measures by another month. Those are the measures that call for people who are returning from travel who are not vaccinated to go through a test before they come back and be quarantined. And here's why I don't actually agree with that policy. And the reason I feel that way is that we are at a very different point in this pandemic and have a very different virus than we did when these policies were put into place. Canada, at some point early in the pandemic, had much lower rates of local transmission because we had good public health policies and we had great vaccination rates compared to many parts of the world. So there was an argument for saying, well, let's reduce this travel from other parts of the world or mitigate the risk of that virus coming in from other parts of the world by doing this testing and requiring vaccination. Of course, Omicron is just so contagious that in some ways it's been the great equalizer, because even with a well-vaccinated population, we have high rates of community transmission here, and those differences between countries have become much less important at this point. The other major argument for all of these vaccine passports, whether it's for a restaurant or a club or a bar or a congregate setting like an airplane or a train for travel, was that vaccinated people had a lower chance of being infected and therefore a lower chance of passing it on to people around them. Of course, Omicron has changed that too. With the immune escape of Omicron, basically it's a virus that has a similar chance of infecting a vaccinated person to an unvaccinated person, because the immunity that we have from vaccination or from prior infection just isn't all that protective against Omicron. Now, what's really important is that although it doesn't protect you much from getting infected, getting a mild infection, it very much still protects you from getting a severe infection. But the premise for these kinds of vaccine passports was that we didn't want people who were unvaccinated, who had a higher chance of having the virus and passing it along to one another, to be in a congregate setting compared to vaccinated people, and that argument no longer holds. And we have data to go with that. The Canadian government puts out test positivity rates in returning travelers. And if you look at from April 1st forward, the positivity rates in vaccinated travelers, they were in and above 3%, whereas the positivity rates in unvaccinated travelers in the same period of time was just above 2%. So you can see that there's really no difference anymore. So the data and the science are telling us that these policies just don't make sense anymore because the conditions of the pandemic have changed and the virus has changed. I think I'll probably get some criticism from some of my colleagues because in some ways I'm going against a vaccine mandate. But I think it's important to be consistent. You know, if we're talking about science and facts and we're trying to dispel myths and talk about misinformation, disinformation, it's on us to continue to follow the science and not stick to an entrenched view, but to say if the science is taking us somewhere, then we're going to talk about that science. And at this point, it makes less sense to have these kinds of policies, but it still makes a lot of sense to go out and get vaccinated to protect yourself from severe infection.